The ladder was slick under her palms, and the rain had soaked through her hood an hour ago. But Tasha kept the brush moving across the second-story trim because the man inside the warm kitchen had paid her half up front, and she could not afford to give any of it back. Water ran down her wrists and into her sleeves. The primer beaded and slid where it should have gripped, and she worked it slow, feathering each stroke the way her father had taught her on a roofing job when she was 16, back when she still believed a person could outwork any hole life dug for them. She had 11 days until the rent was due. She had $212 in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator and a notice taped to her door that used the word final. She did not know that a man 2 houses down had been filming her for the last 6 minutes from the dry seat of his car, and she did not know that by the end of the week 3 million strangers would have watched her do this. You are going to want to know how that happened. Stay with me, because the part that matters is not the video. Her name was Tasha Webb, and she was 31 years old, and she had a 7-year-old daughter named Joy, who was asleep right then in the back seat of a sedan, parked under a sycamore at the edge of the cul-de-sac, because there was nowhere else for Joy to be while her mother worked. The car was where they slept on the nights, the shelter was full, and lately the shelter was always full. Tasha had a thermos of warm milk on the passenger seat and a blanket tucked to her daughter's chin, and the windows cracked an inch so the glass would not fog, and she checked the car every 20 minutes from the top of the ladder, counting the small rise and fall of the blanket before she let herself look away. That was the arithmetic of her days now. Paint check the car, and underneath it, all the other arithmetic, the one that never balanced, the rent against the work against the hours against the one child she had left in the world to keep safe and dry and fed. She had not always painted houses. She had been a dental assistant for 6 years at a clinic across town, steady work, good with the nervous ones, the kind of employee a place keeps. She had a way with the children, especially the ones who came in white-knuckled and left clutching a sticker, because she would crouch to their level and tell them the little water-sucking straw had a name. She called it the elephant, and let them hold it before it went in, and half the parents in that part of town asked for her by name. Then the clinic lost its lease, and the new owners brought their own people, and the savings she and her husband had built went to his hospital bills the spring he got sick. An aggressive thing that moved faster than the doctors said it would, and then he was gone before Joy turned 6, and then the savings were gone too. And what was left was a woman who knew how to keep a frightened child calm and a steady hand, and not much else the market wanted to pay for, so she had learnt to paint. A man at her old church ran a small crew, and he taught her to cut a clean line and load a brush and hold a wet edge, taught her about lead-safe prep on the old houses, and which primer gripped in cold weather, and how to read a wall before you touched it. And when his back gave out, he passed her his ladder and his 3 steadiest clients, and told her she had a better hand than half the men he had hired in 20 years. The work was real. The work was just not enough. Not in a city where a 1-bedroom cost more than she cleared in a month. Not when half her clients paid late and the other half paid in cash that ran out before the next job came. Not when a rained-out week meant a rained-out paycheck, and the rain did not check your bank balance before it fell. The house she was painting belonged to a retired schoolteacher named Walter Briggs, a careful man in his 70s who had hired her on the recommendation of a neighbor, and who had told her gently, when the rain started that morning, that she could come back another day. She had thanked him and said she would rather finish, and she had not told him why. She did not tell anyone why anymore. The why was a coffee can and a notice and a sleeping girl in a car. And those were not things you handed to a stranger over a job. So she had pulled her hood up and climbed the ladder and gotten to work, and Walter had watched her from his window for a while, with a look she could not read, and then he had gone to make a phone call she knew nothing about. What she did not know was that kindness, the real kind, the kind given without an audience, has a way of being seen anyway. Not always. Not on a schedule a person can count on. Sometimes, though, the world turns its face toward the people it has been ignoring. And when it does, it turns fast. The man in the car was named Marcus Hale. He was 48 and he was sitting in front of a house he was thinking about buying, waiting out the rain before he walked the property one more time, and he was on the phone with his sister complaining about the weather when he saw the woman on the ladder. He almost did not look twice. A painter in the rain was not unusual. People worked in worse. Something about the way she kept stopping, though, to look at the parked car under the tree made him lower the phone, and then he saw her climb down, fast and careful, and cross to the sedan and crouch at the back window, and press her hand flat against the glass for a moment, before she climbed back up and kept painting. And Marcus understood, without being told, that there was a child in that car, and that the woman had no better place to put either of them than here, in this rain, on this ladder, at this hour. He lifted his phone. He told his sister he would call her back. And he started to record, not because he meant to do anything with it, but because he did not know what else to do with the thing he was feeling, and a part of him wanted proof that he had seen it. He filmed for 6 minutes. He caught the rain, and the ladder, and the steady, patient strokes, and the moment she climbed down to check the car, and he never once got out to ask if she needed help, and that failure would sit with him later in a way he did not expect. When the rain finally eased, he put the phone down and drove away with the video still on it, and he told himself he would think about what to do, and for 2 days he did nothing, and the not doing gnawed at him. Tasha finished the trim a little after 4. The light was going grey, and her fingers had stopped feeling like fingers. And Walter came out under an umbrella and looked up at the clean white line where the old paint had been peeling that morning, and said it was the best work anyone had done on that house in 30 years. He paid her the second half in cash, then he stood there a moment longer, turning something over, and he said, "You have somebody waiting in that car." It was not a question. Tasha's stomach dropped, because she had learned that when people noticed the car, what usually came next was a problem, a call to somebody, a look that told her she was the kind of mother people worried about for the wrong reasons. Walter only nodded slowly and went back inside. And a minute later he came out again with a paper bag, warm, the bottom already going translucent, and he handed it to her and said, "My wife always made too much, and she has been gone 4 years, and I never broke the habit." There were 2 foil containers inside and a sleeve of crackers and 4 oranges. Tasha said thank you in a voice that came out smaller than she meant it to, and she carried the bag to the car like it was something that might spill. Joy woke when the door opened. She was 7 with her father's wide forehead and a gap where a front tooth had been, and she looked at the bag and then at her mother's wet clothes, and she said, "Did you finish the whole house?" Tasha said she had. Joy said, "Was it cold?" And Tasha said a little, and Joy reached up and put her small cold hand against her mother's wet cheek the way you might check a stove to see if it was still warm, and she said, "You should have worn the other gloves." And that was the thing, that was the exact thing, that her daughter at 7 years old had already learned to worry about her mother's hands. Tasha turned her face into that small palm, so Joy would not see what it did to her. Then she handed back the oranges and started the engine for the heat, and they ate in the parked car while the rain came back soft against the roof. I want you to hold onto that orange, the one Joy peeled in the front seat with her cold fingers, because it is going to come back. The smallest things in a person's life are usually the ones that turn out to be load-bearing. That night, the shelter had a bed, 2 beds, and Tasha took them, and Joy slept in a real room for the first time in 9 days. The room had 8 cots and a window that did not open, and a fluorescent tube in the hall that buzzed all night, and to Joy it was a palace. She had washed her face in a real sink and brushed her teeth at a real counter and put on the clean pajamas they kept in a plastic bag in the trunk for exactly these nights, and she had fallen asleep within minutes, one arm thrown over the edge of the cot like a swimmer. And Tasha had stood over her for a while, just watching the blanket rise and fall, the way she watched it in the car, the same count, the same prayer underneath it. Then she lay down on the next cot and stared at the ceiling tiles and did the arithmetic. 11 days had become 10. $212 had become $460 with Walter's second payment. And the rent on the room she was trying to hold, the room a landlord named Mr. Ma, Okafor had agreed to keep for her if she could come up with $800 by the 1st. Felt for the first time in weeks like a number she might actually reach as she got 3 more jobs and the weather broke and nobody got sick. She let herself believe it for about an hour. She built the whole month in her head, job by job, the stairwell on Thursday, and the duplex the week after, and maybe the porch railings for the woman who had called twice, and she added it up 3 times and got close enough each time that the believing hurt. Then she heard another mother, 2 cots over, crying as quietly as she could, the way you cry when you have learned that even your grief has to make room for other people. A sound pressed down so hard it came out as almost nothing, just breath-catching and a sniff swallowed back. Her name, Tasha would learn later, was Renee, and she had 2 boys and a job at a laundromat and a husband who had left in March, and she was exactly 1 bad week behind the spot Tasha was standing in, which is to say she was Tasha, just a few cots over. Tasha reached across the dark and found that woman's hand and held it without a word, because that was the other thing she knew how to do, the thing the market had never paid her for, and Renee gripped back hard, the grip of somebody who had been holding everything alone for a long time, and they held on like that, 2 strangers in a buzzing room, until they both slept. On the 3rd day, Marcus posted the video. He almost did not. He had clipped it down to 90 seconds and written and deleted 4 different captions, each one feeling like it was using her, turning her hardest hour into something for strangers to feel good about, and finally he wrote only the plainest true thing he knew. He wrote, "I watched this woman paint a house in the rain today so she could pay her rent, and her child was asleep in the car the whole time, and I did nothing but film it, and I have not stopped thinking about that." He did not tag a charity, he did not ask for money, he put it up, and he turned his phone, face down on the table, and he went to bed. By morning it had been seen 200,000 times. By that afternoon, 1 million. By the next day the number had stopped, meaning anything the way a number does when it gets large enough, and the comments had become their own weather, tens of thousands of them, then hundreds of thousands, scrolling faster than anyone could read. People wrote about their own mothers, the ones who had worked doubles and hidden the tiredness. People wrote that they had been that child in that car, that they remembered the cracked window and the thermos and the particular shame of a parent who was trying so hard it hurt to watch. People argued loudly about whether the man should have helped instead of filming, and that argument split the comments down the middle and would not heal. People demanded to know who she was so they could help her. Now, today, this minute, and other people warned that finding her could ruin her, expose her, take the last private thing she had. Marcus watched it move with a growing dread, refreshing the screen at 2 in the morning, because he had not asked her, he had not even spoken to her, he did not know her name, and he had put her face in front of the whole world without her permission. And the thing he had meant as a small private active witness had become enormous and loud and entirely out of his hands. He had wanted to honor her. He was beginning to understand that wanting to honor someone and actually honoring them are not the same act, and that the distance between them is exactly the distance he had kept when he stayed in his dry car. Tasha did not own a phone that could play video. She found out the way the overlooked usually find out that the world has noticed them, which is all at once and from a stranger's mouth. She was at a job 2 days later, a repaint in the stairwell of a 4-story walk-up, cutting in the corners where the old landlord's crew had left fat sloppy lines, when the building manager came down the steps with his tablet held out in front of him like it was hot, and he said, "That is you, is that you, this is you," his voice climbing each time. She had a brush in her hand and a rag over her shoulder, and she did not understand him at first. Then she looked at the small bright screen and saw herself on the ladder in the rain from an angle she had never seen, small and tired and entirely unaware, the hood, the slick rungs, the slow patient strokes, and she saw herself climb down and cross to the sedan and press her hand to the glass. And she heard a stranger's voice over it saying, "I did nothing but film it," and the floor seemed to tilt under her. The manager kept talking. 3 million, can you believe it? 3 million people. You are famous. And the word famous landed wrong, landed like a slap, because there was nothing in that video she would have chosen to show anybody. Her first feeling was not gratitude. Her first feeling was a deep, hot shame, the shame of being seen at her lowest, by people who had not earned the seeing. The private arithmetic of her survival turned into a thing that millions of people now felt entitled to have an opinion about. She set down her brush on the lid of the can. She asked the manager quietly to please turn it off, and something in how she said please made him stop and lower the tablet and go back upstairs without another word. She went into the stairwell and sat on an overturned 5-gallon bucket and put her head in her hands and tried to understand what had happened to her life while she was just trying to get through a Tuesday. Here is the question I keep coming back to, and I would tell you to sit with it too. When the world finally looks at a person it spent years overlooking, does it owe her anything, or does it just owe itself the good feeling of having looked? Tasha did not have the luxury of that question. She had a job to finish and a child to pick up. The money came anyway. That was the strange part, the part that should have been pure relief, and was instead its own kind of vertigo. Someone in the comments figured out which painting crew she might be tied to from a logo half visible on her bucket, and they found the church. And the church had a small fund, and within a day the church's account had received more donations than it had seen in its entire history, $41,000 in climbing, every dollar of it earmarked for the woman in the rain, whose name the donors still did not know. Pastor Lewis, who had baptized Joy and buried Tasha's husband, sat in his office and stared at the number, and then he drove to the shelter and found Tasha and told her, and she did not cry and she did not smile, and she said the first thing that came to her, which was, why? Why now? Why for this? She had been drowning in plain sight for 2 years, and the world had walked past her every single day. And now, because a stranger had pointed a camera, the same world wanted to hand her $41,000, and she could not make the math of that feel like justice. It felt like luck, and luck was a thing she had learned not to trust, because luck that arrives without warning tends to leave the same way. Pastor Lewis was quiet for a while. Then he said something she carried for a long time after. He said the world had not just started seeing her. The people who mattered had been seeing her all along, and what the camera did was let everybody else catch up. He said, "You have been faithful in the rain when no one was watching, and the not watching was never the truth of it. Somebody was always keeping the account." She did not fully believe him that day. She took the help anyway because she had a daughter, and pride is a thing you can afford only when your child has a roof. What none of them knew yet, not Tasha, not the pastor, not the 40,000 strangers, was that the man who filmed her was not finished, and that the next thing he did would matter far more than the video ever could. Marcus had spent his whole adult life building something, and he was good at it, and the thing he had built was a company that managed properties, hundreds of them, apartment buildings and small commercial spaces across 3 counties, the kind of business that is invisible until it is the name on your lease. He had started with 1 duplex he fixed up himself, and he had not forgotten the fixing, the long days with a brush in his hand, which was part of why the woman on the ladder had reached him the way she had. For 2 days after he posted the video, he could not work. He kept seeing her climb down to check the car. And on the 3rd day, he did the thing he should have done first, which was to find her, not the crowd's version of her, not the symbol, but the actual woman with an actual name, and ask her what she needed, and then shut up and listen. It took him a phone call to the church, and a careful, apologetic message passed through Pastor Lewis, who did not trust him at first and said so plainly. Marcus did not argue. He said the pastor was right to be careful, and he asked only for 10 minutes in a public place with whoever Tasha wanted beside her, and he said if she told him to delete the video, he would delete it that minute. Every copy he controlled, and he meant it. 3 days later, they met in a diner on the east side, a warm amber room with worn red booths and a window going gold in the late afternoon. And Tasha came in with Pastor Lewis on one side and Joy on the other, and she sat across from the man who had turned her life inside out, and she waited for him to perform his good deed at her. He did not perform anything. He slid his phone across the table, the video already up, his thumb over the delete option, and he said, "I never asked you. I am sorry. This is yours, not mine, and if you want it gone, say the word and watch me do it." Tasha looked at the phone for a long moment. Then she pushed it back across the table and said, Leave it. Other people needed to see it, she said. Not for her sake, but because there were 100 women on 100 ladders in the rain that nobody was filming, and maybe the next time somebody saw one of them, they would do more than drive away. Marcus took that hit square in the chest, because it was the gentlest possible way of naming exactly what he had failed to do, and he nodded and said, "You are right, and I did drive away, and I will spend a while making up for that." Then Joy, who had been quiet, who had been studying the man the whole time the way children study someone their grown-ups are wary of, reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an orange and set it on the table between them, and she said, "My mom always shares." It was one of Walter's oranges, carried for days in a coat pocket, a little soft now, and Tasha started to tell her to put it away and then could not, because her daughter had just done the truest thing anyone had done at that table, had met a wealthy stranger's guilt with the only wealth the Webbs had, which was the habit of giving even when you had almost nothing to give. Marcus picked up the orange. He held it like it might break, and something happened in his face that none of them had words for. A man being handed back by a 7-year-old the exact thing he had spent 2 days trying to feel his way toward. He did not offer her money at that table. He understood, finally, that money handed across a diner booth would be one more thing done to her, instead of with her, and he had done enough of that already. Instead, he asked her about the work. The real work, the painting, how she had learned it, how many clients she could hold, what it would take to do it steady instead of scrambling. And Tasha, who had not been asked a respectful question about her own competence in 2 years, found herself talking, slow at first, and then not slow, about wet edges and lead-safe prep and the difference between a crew that shows up and a crew that finishes, and Marcus listened the way he had not let himself listen on the day he watched and filmed and drove off. And by the time the coffee was cold, he was not looking at a symbol anymore. He was looking at a tradeswoman who happened to be broke, which is a very different thing from a charity case, and the difference was the whole story. I told you the part that matters is not the video. Here it is. The video made her visible. What a person does with a visible woman is the real test, and almost everybody who saw that clip wanted to feel something and move on. One man wanted to build something. Stay with me. Marcus owned hundreds of properties, and properties need painting constantly, endlessly, turn after turn, unit after unit, and he had been paying 3 different outside crews to do it badly and late for years. He did not give Tasha money. He gave her a contract. Yen. He came back to the diner a week later, the same gold booth, and this time he brought a folder, and inside the folder was not a check, but a proposal, and he laid it out for her and Pastor Lewis and a lawyer the church trusted, page by page in plain language, with no traps in it because the lawyer checked. He offered her the standing painting work for 40 of his buildings, enough work to keep a 4-person crew busy every week of the year at a fair rate written down where she could see it, with the first 3 months paid partly in advance so she could buy a van and ladders and lead-safe gear and hire the very people she had been standing in line beside at the shelter. Tasha read every line. She asked hard questions about scheduling and supply costs and who ate the loss when a tenant trashed a fresh wall, and Marcus answered everyone straight, and a couple of times he did not have the answer and said so and wrote the question down. He did not make her grateful for it. Near the end, he closed the folder and looked at her and said, flatly, "I am getting the better end of this. Good painters who actually finish are worth more than I have been paying, and I have been a fool not to lock one down years ago. You will earn every dollar in here, and I expect you to, and the first time my buildings get a bad coat, I will tell you to your face." It was the most respectful thing anyone had done for her since her husband died, because it did not ask her to be small in exchange for being saved. It asked her to be exactly as capable as she already was. The $41,000 from the church she did something else with. She paid Mr. Okafor the $800 and signed the lease on the 1-bedroom and moved Joy into a room with a door that locked and a window that looked at a tree. She bought a kitchen table at a thrift store for $11 and a set of 4 chairs that did not match, and a bowl, a plain white bowl, and the first thing that ever went in that bowl was oranges. And neither of them said why. Then she took most of what was left, and she did the thing that told you everything about who she was, the thing that no camera caught and no caption described. She drove back to the shelter on a Wednesday and she found Renee, the mother she had held hands with in the dark, the one who had been crying 2 cots over, and Renee was still there, still one bad week from nowhere, and Tasha did not make a speech. She asked Renee where she had been trying to get into, and Renee named a building. And the next morning, Tasha walked into that building's office and paid the deposit and the first month on Renee's apartment in cash, $1,100, and she signed it as a friend and left no number, and she did it without telling anyone. And the only reason it is in this story at all is that Renee told Pastor Lewis months later, weeping in his office, asking who the angel was that had a daughter named Joy. Tasha never claimed it. She had been given much suddenly, and her first full instinct with abundance was the same as her instinct with scarcity, which was to turn and share it. And that instinct, that exact unglamorous reflex, was the thing the world had failed to see for 2 years, and the thing that had been true the whole time. The crew came together fast. She hired Denise from the shelter, who had managed a warehouse before her divorce and could run a schedule in her sleep, who took one look at the mess of Marcus's 40 buildings and the turn dates and the supply runs, and within a week had the whole thing on a whiteboard in the back of the van, color-coded, every job slotted. So, and never once let a crew show up to a unit that was not ready for them. She hired a quiet young man named Eli, who had aged out of foster care at 18 and slept in his truck and had a steadier hand than anyone she had ever trained, a kid who did not say 10 words a day and could cut a line freehand, straight as a chalk snap. And the first time she paid him, on time and in full, he sat in the van for a minute before he could drive, because nobody had ever done that either. She hired back the man from her old church, the one with the bad back, not to climb but to teach, to sit in a folding chair on a job site with a thermos of coffee and tell the young ones where they were about to mess up a line, and he wept the first day because he had given her his ladder thinking it was the end of something, and it turned out to be a seed. They called the company Rain Line because Joy named it, because the whole thing started in the rain, and she painted the name on the side of the first van herself. A clean line, no stencil, and within 4 months they had more work than the 40 buildings, because property managers talk, and a crew that shows up and finishes is rarer than gold. Marcus came by a job site that spring just to see, and he found Tasha up a ladder cutting a clean white line under a second-story window, dry this time, in good light, with a real crew working below her, and a van in the lot with the company name on the door. And he stood there a while the way he had stood at his car window months before. Except this time he was not filming, and this time there was no shame in the watching. Only something that felt a great deal like being forgiven. She came down when she saw him. She did not thank him again. She had done that already and meant it and was done. Instead, she handed him a brush and pointed at a stretch of trim and said, "You said you used to do this. Prove it." And Marcus Hale, who owned hundreds of buildings, took off his jacket and rolled his sleeves and cut a line that was honestly not bad, and the crew gave him a hard time about it, and Joy, doing her homework on the tailgate of the van, laughed at him, and for an afternoon the man who had driven away got to stay. Walter Briggs lived to see it. Tasha repainted his whole house that summer, every board, no charge, no argument, and when he tried to argue, she handed him a brush the way she would later hand one to Marcus, and told him a man who paid her in his late wife's cooking on the worst day of her year did not get to pay her twice. She brought Joy, and the 3 of them ate lunch on his porch in the long gold light, sandwiches Walter insisted on making, too many of them, the old habit, and he told Joy stories about teaching 3rd grade for 40 years. About the boy who ate paste and grew up to be a surgeon, and the girl who never spoke until April and grew up to argue cases in a courtroom, and Joy laughed until she had hiccups. Walter watched her laugh with the particular attention of a man who had spent his life around children and missed it. When they left, he pressed something into Tasha's hand at the door, folded inside a paper napkin, so she would not see it until she was in the van. It was a key, his spare, worn, smooth, and a note in a careful teacher's hand that said only, "You and the girl have a place to be if you ever need one again, day or night. No questions." Tasha sat in the van and held it and understood that this old man had been quietly building her a floor under her feet from the first rainy morning, before the camera, before the crowd, when she was nobody but a painter who would not quit on his trim, and that he was the proof of what Pastor Lewis had said, that somebody had always been watching the right way, the patient way, the way that does not need a video. A year after the rain, Tasha stood at a window in her own apartment and watched Joy do homework at a real table, and there was a bowl of oranges in the middle of that table, because there was always a bowl of oranges now. Joy insisted on it, and neither of them ever said out loud why. The rent was paid months ahead, the crew had grown to 9, the video still surfaced sometimes on its anniversary, and strangers still wrote to her, and she had made a kind of peace with it, because she had decided what it would mean. It would mean that the next woman on the next ladder might get help instead of an audience. She had started a small fund out of Rainline's earnings for exactly that, quiet deposits paid on quiet apartments for mothers nobody was filming, and she ran it the way she had paid that first deposit, without her name on it, because the account that mattered was never the public one. Marcus asked her once, near the end of that first year, whether she forgave him for driving away. And she thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything, and she told him the truth. She said she had stopped needing to. The driving away was the worst thing he did, and the camera was the best thing he did, and they were the same act, the same 6 minutes, a man who saw a person clearly for the first time and did not yet know what seeing required of him. He had figured it out. Most people who watched the video never would. That was not a thing to forgive, she said. That was just a thing to be glad about. She still painted in the rain sometimes, by choice now, when a job ran long and the weather turned, and she would stand up on a ladder with water running down her wrists and think about the woman she had been a year before, who did not know she was being watched, who did not know help was 11 days out, who only knew that the trim was not finished and the rent was due and her daughter was asleep in the car and the work was the one thing in the whole world she could still control. She wanted to reach back through time to that woman and tell her to keep going. She could not. She could be the help for somebody else now, though, 11 days out from a rain they did not know was coming, and that turned out to be the same thing, just pointed forward instead of back. Joy is 12 now. She still keeps an orange in her coat pocket through the winter, every winter, and when people ask her why, she just says it is, in case somebody needs it, and most people think it is a charming thing a child does, and do not understand that they are looking at the whole moral of a life her mother built, carried in a coat pocket soft from the cold, ready to be set on a table in front of a stranger who has more than you and needs reminding what enough looks like. If you have ever been the woman on the ladder, or the child in the car, or the man who almost drove away, I would love to know which one, because I think most of us have been at least one of them, and some of us have been all three. And if a story about being finally seen is the kind of thing that stays with you, there is another one waiting, about a man who swept the same train station floor for 19 years before anyone learned what he was sweeping it to remember.